A billionaire leaned toward his wife and spoke in Japanese. He didn't whisper. He didn't care.
どうして動物に食べ物を傾向させてるの？見てみな、その皮膚、気持ちは水。その重複の下、知った気負いがするだろうな。These creatures shouldn't be touching plates civilized people eat from.
His wife stared at the table, silent.
She's probably too stupid to count the change. Born poor, die poor. They always do.
He laughed, loud, proud. The black waitress stood 3 feet away. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't drop. She opened her notepad.
Whenever you're ready, sir, take your time.
Her voice was soft, steady, almost kind. He had no idea what was coming. What she did next left him speechless. 3 hours earlier, the evening hadn't started yet. Ivy Williams walked through the back entrance of the Langham Room. The January air bit through her coat. Her boots crunched against the salt on the concrete. Inside, the service hallway smelled like industrial bleach and fresh bread. She clocked in at 4:15, same as every Friday. The Langham Room wasn't the kind of place where waitresses became famous. It was the kind of place where they disappeared. You carried plates, you poured wine, you smiled, you were invisible. That was the job. Ivy had been invisible here for 6 years. She hung her coat in the break room and tied her apron. From the pocket, she pulled out a small notebook. The cover was soft from years of handling. The pages were thick with handwriting. Dense, tiny, organized in columns. 6 languages lived inside that notebook. English, Japanese, French, Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese. Nobody in this building knew that. Her coworker Derek walked in, adjusting his tie. He glanced at the notebook. You studying again? Always. What is it tonight? Japanese verb conjugations. Derek shook his head and smiled. Girl, you're the smartest waitress in Chicago and nobody even knows it. Ivy shrugged. That's kind of the point. The general manager, Raymond Foster, stepped into the break room. He clapped his hands once, short, sharp. Listen up. Tonight we have a VIP reservation, 12 guests, private dining section, international group, Japanese, French, Brazilian contacts. The host is Gerald Ashford. He paused like the name should mean something. It didn't, not to Ivy. I need 0 mistakes tonight, 0. This man spends more in one dinner than most of you earn in a month. So stay sharp, stay quiet, and stay out of the way. Ivy raised her hand slightly. I can cover the international guests if you need. I'm comfortable with... Just keep it simple, Ivy. Raymond cut her off without looking at her. Smile, serve, that's it. He walked out. Derek raised an eyebrow at Ivy. She said nothing. She just opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top. That notebook held 6 languages, and tonight it would change her life. The first guests began arriving at 5:30. Ivy moved through the dining room like water, quiet, smooth, no wasted steps. She placed silverware with the kind of precision that nobody noticed but everybody felt. The forks were straight. The glasses caught the light at the right angle. The napkins folded exactly the same way on every table. This was her craft, and she was invisible inside it. At 6:15, a couple sat down near the window. French, maybe late 50s. The woman wore a silk scarf. The man kept squinting at the menu, turning it sideways, muttering under his breath. The sommelier walked over and tried to explain the wine pairings. His French was a textbook, stiff. The couple smiled politely, but their eyes went blank. They didn't understand him. He didn't understand them. Ivy was refilling water at the next table. She heard the struggle. She set down the pitcher and walked over. She spoke to them in French, not classroom French, conversational, warm, the kind of French that made people lean in. She described the wine pairings. She recommended the duck. She made a small joke about the Chicago weather compared to Paris. The woman's face lit up. She grabbed Ivy's hand across the table and squeezed it. The sommelier stood there with his mouth half open. Ivy smiled, nodded once, and went back to pouring water. Like nothing happened. 20 minutes later, a man sat alone at the bar. Brazilian, tall, frustrated. He was trying to explain a food allergy to the bartender, something about shellfish. His English kept breaking apart mid-sentence. The bartender nodded but clearly didn't follow. Ivy passed by on her way to the kitchen. She stopped, switched to Portuguese. Clean, direct. She got the details in 15 seconds, walked to the kitchen, relayed the allergy to the chef, came back with a safe menu option. The man stared at her. Then he pulled out his wallet and handed her a $50 bill. "You just saved my night," he said. "Just doing my job," she said. She tucked the bill in her apron and kept moving. Derek watched the whole thing from across the room. He leaned against the service station, arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. "Ivy, what the hell are you?" She didn't answer. She was already clearing a table. The French couple left a 40% tip and wrote a note on the receipt. The Brazilian man told the bartender he'd never had better service in any American restaurant. The sommelier avoided eye contact with Ivy for the rest of the night. None of this made it to Raymond. No one told him. No one thought to. Because in a place like the Langham Room, the people who carry the plates don't get credit. They get schedules. During her 15-minute break, Ivy sat in the back hallway on a plastic chair. She ate a granola bar and opened her notebook. She flipped past the French pages, past the Portuguese section, past the Mandarin characters. She stopped on the Japanese section. It was the thickest part of the notebook. Pages and pages of vocabulary, grammar patterns, formal speech levels, cultural notes. She had written tiny stars next to the phrases she found most beautiful. Derek poked his head around the corner. "What are you working on now?" "Japanese." "How much does that make?" "6. He laughed. "You're absolutely wild, you know that?" She smiled without looking up. "It keeps my brain quiet." Derek leaned against the door frame. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know you don't belong here, right? Not like this." Ivy closed the notebook slowly. She slid it back into her apron pocket. The edges were soft. The spine was cracked. It weighed almost nothing. "I belong wherever I'm standing, Derek." She said it without bitterness, without self-pity, just a fact. She stood up, straightened her apron, and walked back toward the dining floor. The jazz trio had started playing. The room smelled like butter and rosemary. Crystal glasses caught the low, golden light. Everything looked beautiful. Everything looked expensive. And the most valuable thing in the entire room was the woman no one was looking at. In less than 2 hours, a billionaire sitting 20 feet away would find that out the hard way. But right now, Ivy Williams was just a waitress carrying a notebook that nobody had ever asked to see. Ivy Williams didn't grow up with advantages. She grew up with absences. No father. Her mother left when she was 4. After that, it was the system. Foster homes on the south side of Chicago. 5 different families before she turned 12. Some were kind, some were not. None of them lasted. The only thing that lasted was the library. The Harold Washington Library on State Street became her home when no house would. She went there after school. She went there on weekends. She went there when the foster house got too loud or too quiet. At 9 years old, a librarian named Mrs. Patterson handed her a Spanish audiobook. Ivy hadn't asked for it. She didn't even know what it was. Mrs. Patterson just smiled and said, "Try something new today." Ivy listened to that audiobook 11 times. By the end of the month, she could hold a basic conversation in Spanish. Something clicked inside her brain, something that had always been there but never had a name. By 12, she spoke 3 languages. By 16, 5. She learned from audiobooks, library computers, free apps, YouTube videos, foreign films with subtitles turned off. She didn't have tutors. She didn't have money. She had time and hunger. Languages gave her something that nothing else could: control. Every new language was a room with a lock on the inside, and she was the only one with the key. No foster parent could take that. No school transfer could erase it. At 18, she got accepted into the University of Chicago, full scholarship, linguistics program. The letter came on a Tuesday in April. She read it 6 times standing at the mailbox. But life doesn't wait for dreams to settle. Her last foster placement collapsed 3 weeks before the enrollment deadline. She needed income immediately. There was no safety net, no one to call, no backup plan. The scholarship lapsed, the door closed. She started waitressing that summer. She never stopped. That was 10 years ago. Ivy was 28 now, still carrying plates, still carrying that notebook, still learning, still waiting for a door that wouldn't close on her. She didn't know it yet, but tonight, that door was about to open. Gerald Ashford arrived at 7:45. You could feel him before you saw him. The front door opened and the energy in the room shifted. Conversations didn't stop, but they lowered. Heads turned just slightly. The hostess straightened her back. Gerald walked in like he owned the building. Maybe he did. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it was sewn onto his body. His watch caught the chandelier light. His shoes clicked against the marble floor with each step. Sharp, deliberate. Ray was already at the smell of truffle. Ivy heard every word. Her hand paused on the pitcher for half a second. Then she kept pouring. She said nothing. She didn't look up. She just listened. And she waited. The first course arrived. Ivy served each plate with precision. Gerald didn't acknowledge her. Not once. She was furniture. She was air. Then came the wine. Gerald picked up the wine list and ordered a bottle. He named the vineyard, the year, and the region. But he mispronounced the vintage. On purpose. It was a test. The kind of test rich men give to people they've already decided are beneath them. He wanted to see if she'd correct him, if she'd stumble, if she'd prove what he already believed about her. Ivy didn't take the bait. She repeated the order back. Correct vineyard, correct year, correct pronunciation. No emphasis, no correction. Just accuracy delivered with a quiet voice and a steady hand. Excellent choice, sir. I'll have that brought right away. Gerald paused. His wine glass was halfway to his lips. For the first time that evening, he actually looked at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then he set his glass down, turned back to his guests, and kept talking. But something changed in that moment. Ivy felt it. A shift, like a predator noticing movement in the grass. He wasn't angry. He wasn't impressed. He was curious. And curious, from a man like Gerald Ashford, was dangerous. Derek passed Ivy near the kitchen door. He whispered without stopping. You good? I'm good. That guy gives me the creeps. He should. She pushed through the kitchen door, set down the pitcher, took one deep breath, let it out slow. The night was just getting started, and Gerald Ashford was just getting comfortable. The second course came out at 8:30, seared scallops with yuzu foam. The kitchen was running smooth. The jazz trio played something slow and golden. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But at Gerald's table, something ugly was growing. He was 3 glasses of wine in now. His voice was louder. His Japanese was faster, and his words were getting worse. He leaned toward Tomoko and spoke without lowering his voice. She's back again. The black one. You'd think they'd keep her in the kitchen where nobody has to see her. Tomoko moved her fork across her plate. She didn't eat. She didn't respond. Gerald kept going. He spoke to his Japanese business associate across the table, a man named Mr. Anderson. You know what's funny? These people think putting on a uniform makes them professional, but you can't hide what they are. Low class, no education, no future. He chuckled, took another sip. I bet she has 3 kids at home and no idea who the fathers are. Mr. Anderson gave a thin smile but said nothing. He glanced at Ivy, then looked away. Ivy was standing 4 feet from the table, replacing a breadbasket. Her fingers moved calmly, steadily, but under the table's edge, out of sight, her other hand was clenched into a fist so tight her nails pressed into her palm. She heard every word, every single one. She kept her face still, kept her breathing even, picked up the empty basket and walked toward the kitchen. In the hallway, she stopped, pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes for 3 seconds. The kind of anger that lives in your chest and pretends to be calm. That was what she carried back to the dining floor. She thought about telling Raymond. Then she remembered last month. A server named Kelly had complained about a VIP guest who grabbed her arm. Kelly was gone by the following Monday. The guest came back the following Friday. Raymond's loyalty was simple. It followed the money. Always had. Always would. So Ivy swallowed it, like she'd swallowed it 100 times before, in foster homes, in classrooms, in every room where someone with power decided she didn't matter. She picked up a fresh pitcher and walked back out. But she wasn't the only one listening that night. 2 tables away, Eleanor Caldwell sat with her son James and 2 colleagues. White tablecloth, quiet conversation, wine barely touched. Eleanor was 61 years old. She had built Caldwell and Sterling from a 2-person office into a global consulting firm. She had served as a diplomat in Tokyo for 8 years. She spoke fluent Japanese, and she had heard everything Gerald said. Every word, every joke, every slur. She didn't react visibly. Her posture didn't change. Her expression stayed measured. But her eyes kept returning to Ivy, watching the young woman move through the room, watching her absorb the blows without breaking stride. Eleanor set her wine glass down, slowly, deliberately. She leaned toward her son. James looked at her.
"What is it?"
"That man," Eleanor said quietly. "He's been saying the most vile things about their waitress, in Japanese, for the last 30 minutes. James frowned. "Does she know?" Eleanor watched Ivy cross the dining room, straight back, steady hands, perfect composure. "I don't know yet," Eleanor said, "but I intend to find out." She picked up her wine glass again, took a slow sip, and kept watching. Something was building in that room. 2 tables apart, 2 women listening to the same poison from the same man. One had the power to act, the other had a reason to. It happened between the 3rd and 4th courses. Gerald's interpreter hadn't shown up. The man was supposed to arrive at 8. It was now almost 9. Gerald had called twice. No answer. At first it didn't matter. Most of the table spoke English well enough. Business moved forward. Deals got discussed. Numbers were thrown around with confidence. But then Mr. Anderson leaned forward. He had a concern about a clause in the contract, something about intellectual property rights in the Japanese market. It was specific, technical, and his English wasn't strong enough to express it with the precision it required. He tried, twice. The words came out tangled, incomplete. He stopped mid-sentence, frustrated, and switched back to Japanese. Gerald waved his hand. "We'll sort it out later." But Mr. Anderson shook his head. This wasn't a later kind of issue. This was the kind of detail that could collapse a deal if it wasn't addressed now. The table went quiet. Gerald's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to things stalling. He wasn't used to needing help he couldn't buy on the spot. Ivy was placing the 4th course. Pan-seared duck with blackberry reduction. She moved plate by plate around the table, silent, professional, but she was listening. She heard the clause Mr. Anderson was struggling with. She understood the legal nuance he was trying to express. She knew the exact Japanese phrasing he needed translated. She set down the last plate, straightened up, and made a decision. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was calm, clear. "I may be able to help with the translation if you'd like." Gerald looked at her, his face twisted slightly, like she had just told a joke he didn't find funny. "You? Help with what?" "The concern Mr. Anderson is raising about the intellectual property clause. I can translate if that would be useful." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where the air in the room changes weight. Then Ivy turned to Mr. Anderson, and she spoke in Japanese. Not broken Japanese, not phrasebook Japanese, formal business Japanese, the kind that takes years to learn, the kind that signals education, discipline, and deep cultural understanding. She asked him to explain his concern in full, take his time. She would make sure it was communicated accurately. Gerald's fork stopped in the air, his mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Mr. Anderson stared at her for a long moment. Then relief broke across his face like sunlight. He exhaled. He nodded. and he began speaking. He talked for nearly 2 minutes, complex, detailed, technical. Ivy listened without interrupting. When he finished, she turned to the table and translated every point into English. Precise, organized. She didn't miss a single detail. She didn't add her own interpretation. She delivered his words exactly as he intended them. When she finished, the table was still. Mr. Anderson spoke again in Japanese, directly to Ivy this time, not to Gerald, to her. She responded. He nodded. She translated his follow-up to the group, back and forth, seamless, professional, like she had done this 1,000 times. The power at that table shifted in 30 seconds. Gerald was no longer the center. Ivy was, and Gerald knew it. His face moved through stages. Shock first, then confusion, then something cold and tight behind his eyes. The slow, sickening realization that every private insult he had whispered in Japanese across this table had been heard, understood, absorbed. Every word about her skin, her smell, her intelligence, her worth. She had heard all of it, and she hadn't said a word. Until now. Gerald set down his fork. His appetite was gone. But the night was far from over. Eleanor Caldwell didn't rush. She never did. She set her napkin on the table, pushed her chair back, stood up slowly. Her son James watched her but didn't ask where she was going. He knew that look. When his mother moved with that kind of quiet purpose, you didn't interrupt. Eleanor walked across the dining room. Her heels were soft on the carpet. She passed Gerald's table without glancing at him. She stopped in front of Ivy. The two women looked at each other. Eleanor spoke first, in Japanese. One sentence, simple but deliberate. Then she switched to English. That was textbook formal Japanese, flawless structure. Where did you study? Ivy blinked, once. I didn't study anywhere, I taught myself. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, the way someone does when they hear something they didn't expect but immediately believe. I was a diplomat in Tokyo for 8 years. I worked with translators, professors, embassy staff. Your Japanese is more precise than half the attachés I trained with. Ivy didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She just held Eleanor's gaze. Gerald had been watching. He leaned back in his chair and let out a short laugh. Let's not get carried away. She picked up a few phrases. It's a party trick. Impressive for a waitress, sure, but let's not pretend. Eleanor turned to him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was the kind of calm that makes powerful men stop talking. She spoke in Japanese, slowly, clearly, so that Mr. Anderson and every Japanese-speaking person at the table could understand. Mr. Ashford, I've been sitting 2 tables away from you all evening. I've heard everything you said about this young woman. Every comment about her skin, her smell, her intelligence. She understood every word. And honestly, her grammar is cleaner than yours. The room didn't gasp. It was worse than that. It went completely still. Gerald's face drained. Not red, not flushed. White. The blood just left. Tomoko closed her eyes, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't move. Mr. Anderson looked at Gerald with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something heavier. The kind of look a man gives when respect dies quietly in real time. Eleanor turned back to Ivy. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a business card. Cream-colored, embossed lettering, heavy paper. She placed it on Ivy's serving tray. I'd like to speak with you, not as a waitress, as a linguist. Ivy looked down at the card. Caldwell and Sterling Global Consulting. Eleanor Caldwell, founder and CEO. Her hand trembled, just barely, just enough that only someone standing very close would notice. She closed her fingers around the card. Thank you, she said, quiet, steady, but her voice cracked on the second word, just a little. Eleanor nodded once, then she walked back to her table. Gerald stared at the tablecloth. His wine sat untouched. His jaw was locked tight. Then he pushed his chair back, stood up, and left the table without a word. Gerald disappeared toward the restroom, but everyone at the table knew he wasn't going to wash his hands. He was going to make a phone call. That's what men like him did when they lost control. They called someone. They fixed things. They made problems disappear. But this problem wasn't going to disappear. At the table, Tomoko sat very still. Her plate was untouched, her wine glass full. She had been silent all night, not because she had nothing to say, because she had learned a long time ago that speaking cost more than silence. But when Ivy passed behind her chair, Tomoko reached out. Her fingers caught the edge of Ivy's sleeve. Gentle, almost nothing. Ivy stopped. Tomoko didn't turn around. She spoke in Japanese, barely above a whisper, so quiet that no one else at the table could hear. I'm sorry for everything he said tonight. I should have stopped him. I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that. Ivy stood still for a moment. Then she leaned down, just slightly, and she responded in Japanese, same volume, same softness. You don't have to apologize for someone else's words, but thank you. That means more than you know. Tomoko's fingers released the sleeve. She nodded once. Her eyes were wet, but nothing fell. Two women. A shared language. A quiet understanding of what it means to be dismissed by powerful men. That moment lasted maybe 10 seconds. Nobody in the restaurant saw it. Nobody wrote about it. But it was the most honest thing that happened all night. Ivy walked through the kitchen doors. Derek was waiting by the dish station, arms folded, eyes wide. Ivy, what the hell just happened out there? She leaned against the counter, let out a long breath. Then she pulled Eleanor's business card from her apron, held it up between two fingers. Derek took it read it again. Caldwell and Sterling. Eleanor Caldwell. He looked up. Ivy, do you know who this woman is? No. He pulled out his phone, typed fast, turned the screen toward her. Forbes profile, Fortune 500 list. A photograph of Eleanor shaking hands with a former president. Ivy stared at the screen. She didn't speak. Derek grabbed her shoulders. This is it. This is your door. You hear me? Ivy reached into her apron and pulled out the notebook. She looked at it. The worn cover, the cracked spine, the pages thick with years of invisible work. This has been my door, she said quietly. She's just the first person who knocked. She slid the notebook back into her pocket, took a breath, and walked back onto the floor. The night wasn't over yet. Gerald came back from the hallway at 9:20. His face was tight, controlled. The kind of calm that isn't calm at all. It's a decision wearing a mask. He didn't sit down. He walked straight to Raymond Foster at the host station, leaned in close. His voice was low, but his words were sharp. That waitress, the black one, I want her off the floor, now. Raymond blinked. Sir, I'm not sure what... She inserted herself into a private business conversation. She was unprofessional. She overstepped, and I won't tolerate it. Raymond straightened his tie, a nervous habit. Mr. Ashford, I assure you our staff is trained to... Gerald cut him off. His voice dropped even lower, colder. Let me make this simple. I spend over $200,000 in this restaurant every year. My associates dine here weekly. If that woman is still on the floor in 5 minutes, I will personally make sure every restaurant owner on the Magnificent Mile knows that the Langham Room has a staffing problem. Do we understand each other? Raymond understood. Money talks. Money threatens. And money wins. That was the rule he'd lived by for 20 years in this business. He found Ivy near the service station. He pulled her aside. He couldn't look her in the eyes. Ivy, I need you to move to the back for the rest of the night. She stared at him. Why? Mr. Ashford has raised a concern about your conduct. I think it's best if... My conduct? I helped translate a business conversation that was falling apart. His own interpreter never showed up. I know, but he's a major client and I need to manage this. Manage this, you mean manage me? Raymond's jaw tightened. Ivy, please, just go to the back, I'll handle the rest. Ivy looked at him for a long moment. She'd seen this before. The math that managers do. The quiet arithmetic of power. 1 waitress versus 1 billionaire. The numbers always came out the same. She untied her apron strings, started to turn. "That won't be necessary." The voice came from behind Raymond, calm, clear, the kind of voice that fills a room without rising. Eleanor Caldwell stood 3 steps away. Her son James was behind her. She had heard everything. "I watched everything that happened tonight," Eleanor said. "Every moment. Your server did nothing unprofessional. In fact, she provided a level of service that your restaurant should be advertising, not punishing." Raymond opened his mouth, closed it. He was caught between 2 forces, and he knew it. Gerald was louder, Eleanor was calmer, and the room was watching. Before he could respond, a chair scraped at Gerald's table. Mr. Anderson stood up. He straightened his jacket, walked over to where Raymond, Eleanor, and Ivy were standing. He addressed the group in English, clear, measured. "I'd like to say something." Everyone turned. Tonight, Ms. Williams translated a critical term in our negotiation, a term that Mr. Ashford's own interpreter was supposed to handle but didn't. Because of her, we avoided a significant misunderstanding that could have cost both sides millions. He paused, looked directly at Ivy. "I'd like the record to show that her work tonight was the most professional translation I've received in any American business meeting." He gave Ivy a slight bow. Not dramatic, not performative, a gesture of genuine professional respect. Ivy's breath caught, just for a second. Eleanor stepped forward. She turned to Gerald, who had followed Mr. Anderson and now stood stiff near the host station. She spoke in English this time, clearly, so the entire section could hear. "Mr. Ashford, you spent this evening making degrading comments about this young woman. You mocked her race, you mocked her intelligence, you mocked her dignity, all in a language you assumed she couldn't understand." She paused. "I'm a witness. Your associate is a witness." She looked past Gerald to the table, to Tomoko, who sat with her hands folded, still, watching. "Your wife is a witness." Tomoko didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply nodded. One small, steady movement. The most powerful thing she'd done all night. Gerald's face went through something ugly. Rage first, then fear. Then the particular stillness of a man calculating damage, running numbers in his head, measuring what this would cost him. The dining room had gone quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone pretends not to listen but hears everything. Ray stood in the middle of it all. He looked at Ivy. He looked at Gerald. He looked at the floor. Then he made a choice. "Mr. Ashford," his voice was steady, barely, "I think it would be best if we comped your meal this evening." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "And I think it would be best if you didn't return." The words hung in the air. Raymond's hands were shaking at his sides, but he didn't take them back. Gerald said nothing, not one word. He straightened his cuffs, buttoned his jacket, turned and walked toward the coat check. No explosion, no shouting, no dramatic scene. Just a man leaving a room that no longer belonged to him. His footsteps clicked against the marble, sharp, deliberate, the same sound that had commanded attention 3 hours ago. But now it sounded different. Now it sounded like retreat. Tomoko rose from the table. She picked up her clutch, followed her husband toward the door. But at the entrance, she stopped, turned, looked back across the dining room. Her eyes found Ivy. She held the look for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Something passed between them, something that didn't need language. Any language. Then she turned and walked out into the cold Chicago night. The door closed behind her. The jazz trio started playing again, a slow, soft melody. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked. Ivy stood by the service station. Her apron was still untied. Her hands were still. Her eyes were dry. Derek appeared beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. After a long moment, Ivy retied her apron, picked up a pitcher of water, and walked back onto the floor. Because the shift wasn't over. And Ivy Williams wasn't the kind of woman who left before the job was done. The rest of that night moved differently. It started small. A couple sitting near the window flagged Ivy down. They were from Osaka. The woman spoke in Japanese, slow and careful. We saw what happened. Your Japanese is beautiful. Where are you from? Chicago, Ivy said. Born and raised. The woman smiled. Then Chicago should be very proud. At another table, the French regular who had watched the wine pairing earlier in the evening raised his glass as Ivy passed. I always wondered about you, he said. Now I know. A woman dining alone near the bar stopped Ivy and pressed a folded napkin into her hand. Inside, a handwritten note. You are extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Ivy tucked the napkin into her apron, next to the notebook, next to Eleanor's card. Her pocket was getting heavy, heavy with things that mattered. The invisible woman was suddenly uncomfortably visible, and she didn't quite know what to do with that. By the time the last table cleared, it was past midnight. Derek walked her to the back entrance. The January air hit them both like a wall. Hell of a night, he said. Yeah. You gonna call her? Eleanor? Ivy pulled the business card from her apron, looked at it under the parking lot light. The embossed letters caught the glow. Yeah, she said. I'm gonna call her. 2 days later, Ivy stood in the lobby of Caldwell and Sterling's Chicago office. 42nd floor, glass walls. Lake Michigan stretched out gray and endless beyond the windows. She wore her best clothes, a black blouse, dark pants, shoes she'd polished that morning with a kitchen towel. They were clean but not expensive. Everything about her was clean but not expensive. She carried one thing with her, the notebook. A receptionist led her to Eleanor's office. The door was already open. Eleanor stood by the window reading something on her tablet. She looked up when Ivy entered. Ivy, thank you for coming. Please sit down. Ivy sat. The chair was leather, soft. She kept her back straight. Eleanor didn't make small talk. She wasn't that kind of person. I'll be direct. Caldwell and Sterling works with international clients across 30 countries. We negotiate deals in multiple languages every week. We need people who don't just translate words. We need people who understand what's behind the words, the culture, the tone, the things people mean but don't say. She paused, looked at Ivy. I've worked with linguists from Harvard, Oxford, Georgetown, people with master's degrees and doctoral research. And I'm telling you right now, what I saw you do in that restaurant was better than most of them. Ivy's hands were in her lap, steady, but her heart was loud. I'm offering you a position, junior linguistic consultant, full-time, salary, benefits, and a tuition reimbursement program that would cover your degree at the University of Chicago. The words landed one at a time, each one heavier than the last. Salary, benefits, degree. The three things she had spent 10 years believing she would never hear in the same sentence. Ivy opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't have a degree. I don't have any formal training. Everything I know I learned from library books and free apps and late nights after double shifts. I know, Eleanor said. That's why I'm offering you this job. She leaned forward. May I see your notebook? Ivy hesitated. The notebook was personal, messy. It wasn't a resume. It wasn't polished. It was years of solitary work crammed into worn pages. It was private, but she handed it over. Eleanor opened it. She turned the pages slowly, page after page. French vocabulary lists, Portuguese verb charts, Mandarin character practice, Spanish idioms. She stopped in the Japanese section, the thickest part. Pages dense with grammar patterns, formal speech levels, cultural notes, animations about bowing conventions, indirect refusal phrases, the difference between public politeness and private honesty. Eleanor looked at those pages for a long time. Then she closed the notebook, slid it across the desk back to Ivy. This is your credential, until the university gives you another one. Ivy pressed her lips together, hard. She looked at the ceiling, blinked twice, breathed in through her nose. She would not cry in this office, but it was close. It was very close. When do I start? She asked. Her voice was rough at the edges. Monday. Ivy's first day at Caldwell and Sterling felt like stepping into someone else's life. A badge with her name on it, a desk by a window, a company laptop, a stack of client files from 4 different countries. She set the notebook on the desk, right next to the laptop. Old world beside new world. Everything she had been next to everything she was becoming. That same week, something else happened. Something Ivy didn't plan and couldn't control. A diner at the Langham Room had filmed the exchange with Gerald. Not the whole thing, just enough. Ivy translating for Mr. Anderson. Eleanor confronts Gerald. The silence that followed. The video hit social media on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday evening, it had 4 million views. The headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire insults waitress in Japanese. Doesn't know she's fluent. A self-taught linguist shuts down racist billionaire in his own language. The comments poured in, thousands of them. People sharing their own stories. Stories about being underestimated. Stories about hidden talents. Stories about the gap between what people see and what people are. Ivy didn't seek the attention. She didn't do interviews. She didn't post a response. She just went to work. Her new work. As for Gerald Ashford, the consequences came quietly, the way they always do for men at that level. Mr. Anderson pulled out of the deal. 2 board members called for a review of Gerald's conduct. Business partners in Tokyo stopped returning his calls. And Tomoko filed for separation. Quietly. Through lawyers. Without cameras. The narrator doesn't dwell on Gerald's fall. This story was never about his punishment. It was about Ivy's rise. 6 months later, Ivy had facilitated negotiations in 3 languages for Caldwell and Sterling. She was enrolled part-time at the University of Chicago. Linguistics. The program she was supposed to start 10 years ago. Eleanor mentioned her in a keynote at a global business conference. 500 people in the audience. The most talented linguist I've ever met was waiting tables when I found her. Not because she lacked ability, but because nobody thought to ask what she could do. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the applause started. Slow at first, then loud, then standing. Ivy wasn't in the audience. She was at her desk, working, notebook open beside her laptop. She didn't need the applause. She never had. She just needed one person to knock on the door she'd been standing behind for 10 years. Ivy still carries a notebook. The first one sits in the top drawer of her desk at Caldwell and Sterling. The cover is soft. The spine is broken. The pages are yellow at the edges. She doesn't write in it anymore, but she opens it sometimes, runs her fingers across the ink, remembers what it felt like to study at 2 in the morning after a double shift, remembers the weight of learning something that nobody asked her to learn and nobody paid her to know. She started a second notebook the week she began her new job. Same size, same brand. She found it at the same drugstore where she bought the first one 10 years ago. On the first page, she wrote a single sentence. She wrote it 6 times, once in each language she speaks. I was always here. Not, I finally made it. Not, I proved them wrong. I was always here, because that's the truth. Ivy Williams didn't become talented the night Gerald Ashford sat down in that restaurant. She didn't become valuable the moment Eleanor Caldwell handed her a business card. She didn't become worthy when 4 million strangers said her name. She was always those things. Every night she closed the restaurant and opened a textbook. Every morning she woke up tired and studied anyway. Every shift she served someone who looked through her like glass. She was always there. The world just wasn't looking. And that's the part of this story that stays with me. Because Ivy isn't rare. That's what people get wrong. They hear this story and think she's 1 in a million, some kind of miracle. She's not. There are thousands of Ivys out there right now, tonight, carrying plates, driving buses, stocking shelves, cleaning offices after everyone goes home. People with extraordinary minds trapped in ordinary jobs, not because they lack talent, but because nobody ever stopped long enough to notice. Studies show that multilingual employees generate up to 30% more revenue in international business settings. Research found that Black women are the fastest-growing group of entrepreneurs in America, yet receive less than 1% of venture capital funding. The talent is there. The opportunity isn't. That's not just unfair. That's a waste. A massive, inexcusable waste of human potential. And it's happening right now. In your city, in your neighborhood, maybe in the restaurant where you had dinner last night. So here's what I'm asking you to do. It's small. It won't cost you money. It won't take more than a few seconds. The next time someone serves you, look at them. Really look at them. Not through them, not past them. At them. Ask them their name. Ask them how their day is going. And mean it. You don't know their story. You don't know what they carry in their pockets or their heads or their hearts. You might be standing in front of someone who speaks 6 languages, or someone who writes music that would stop you in your tracks, or someone who can solve problems that entire boardrooms can't crack. You'll never know, unless you stop assuming you already do. That's it. That's the whole thing. See people. Really see them. And when you find talent, open the door. Because sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment, one business card on a serving tray. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me about a time someone underestimated you. Tell me about a talent you've been hiding. Tell me about the notebook you carry that nobody's ever asked to see. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who's been invisible too long. Someone who's still waiting for their knock on the door. And if you're in a position to hire, to mentor, to fund, to teach, look past the resume. Look past the job title. Look at the person. Because the next Ivy Williams might be standing right in front of you, and you might be the only one who sees her. One last thing. A colleague asked Ivy during her first week what it felt like to finally be recognized. She smiled, and she said this: "Your job title is what you do. Your talent is who you are. Remember that. I'll see you in the next one."
Chirac lost the deal. His partners and his wife, Ivy. She went into Cartwell and Sterling on Monday with a badge, a desk, and the same notebook she'd carried for 10 years. But here's what stays with me. Ivy didn't become talent that night. She was always talent. 6 languages, learned from library books, free apps, and 2 a.m. study sessions after double shifts. For 10 years, nobody asked, nobody looked, and that's the real lesson. We walk past people every day, servers, drivers, cleaners, and decide who they are in 2 seconds based on their uniform, the skin. We never ask what they carry inside. And because of that, we miss brilliance standing right in front of us, pouring out water, clearing out plates, waiting for someone to finally knock on the door. So let me ask you something real. What's the thing you've been building in secret that nobody's asked to see? Or have you ever been completely invincible to someone who should have